does turn to Knowing Dick, which is a great title. It has many different ways of reading into it, especially once you read the rest of it. That's on page 1109. And the central thing about Knowing Dick is his meeting with Polly. You gotta love too some of the allusions and silly humor and puns that are all throughout this too. It's almost as if Manny is playing a trick throughout this entire section.
This is a perfect example. This chapter came about because while writing this book, on one of these old movie channels that's come up in recent years, I think it was the Movie Channel, I watched the movie Where Love Has Gone, where Jack Jones sings the title song. And everything I quote there is from the advertisements on the movie poster. You couldn't stand your daughter stealing your lover, blah, blah, blah. And I thought to myself, because later on, I think maybe before or later or whatnot, this is twice Nixon appears in this. So this is after he's had his infamous meltdown where he says the press won't have Nixon to kick around again. He lost the California governor's race in '62. So he's there and he's with his wife, and it shows a tender side to him that in this book and also the spy book later we see Nixon as most people know him. But I wanted to have that moment where Nixon is silly, and this is where he decides he's going to run for president. So.
But talk about the initial conversation too between Polly and Nixon, and how it degrades. Do you not recall it?
Is that before or after? I think that's.
This is after this initial framing sequence.
Yeah, I think. The Prohibition Party. So yeah, I wanted to have. This is part of showing. I mentioned cephalopods. Paulie's an octopus, and I talk about Lou Wasserman's company called The Octopus, which is what it was really called. His agency was called in L.A. You know, we've seen Paulie with Jimmy Hoffa, a union guy. We've seen Paulie threaten Sonny Liston. We've seen him threaten the owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers who leave town. Now we see Paulie at the commission meetings against the other real life mafia bosses. We've seen Paulie. Now basically kidnapping Dick Nixon and telling him you must run for president, and then he's going to back him, which is odd. But we know Paulie, for example, not only has a piece of the union, but he owns the company that's doing the bargaining. So Paulie is setting up, Nixon. He wants Nixon to be his boy, and it's really a great scene. And you can imagine, Dick Nixon cowering in a chair, and then in the end, Nixon starts stealing little coffee nips candies, and that
seems to be very effective in dealing with all sorts of people, except for snakes that don't rattle like Big Frank.
And
I wanted you to mention, even though it's of a silly nature, some of the puns in here, because it's perfectly in line. I've seen Nixon in interviews and in old footage, and he does have this almost unaware quality of him where he'll say things like "men love Dick" and not really recognize what he's even said. But that's all through this conversation. He's saying shit like that, and I realized the initial characterization, but I also think that it has some metafictive qualities to it as well as Manny is interspersing.
Nixon was a very intelligent guy. He was emotionally all fucked up. I have him stealing the coffee nips as another sort of shout out to my dad. I have Frank Sinatra being beat up because my dad hated Sinatra. My dad hated Muhammad Ali, as did I. And so I have Ali in the background basically benefiting from the Sonny Liston stuff. Here, Nixon in his mind is sort of plotting okay, I'm going to distance myself from Paulie, but he's sort of plotting out loud. He's not realizing that he's sort of speaking out loud. And Paulie, I think once or twice says, I can hear you, Dick. And he's like, oh, and then, he starts singing. Nixon started singing. I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. He's singing Oh, Susanna, which comes out of nowhere. But it's the kind of thing that you could see that a man who's cracking up under pressure of some sort might be starting singing, and then they sing Swanee River and these whole kinds of things. No one threatens Dick Nixon. And you get his resentments towards Kennedy and the stealing of the election and all of this stuff here, and the mafia. I mean, there's so much. There's probably about 2 or 3 dozen really just great long conversations in it, and the Nixon Maravelli conversation is that and Nixon shot Paulie a death's head glare and sat down again. Paulie said, "Jesus Christ, I could have given birth to triplets in the fucking time it took me to get you to sit down, your ass down and listen." Nixon said, "Okay, are you satisfied, Maravelli?" "Not yet, but I'm liking where things are going." "Well, I'm not. But let's get down to business. About Hiss." So this brings up Alger Hiss. So you have in this one conversation, even if someone reading this in 200 years only knew that Nixon was a president, you would get a good sense of his paranoia, his anti-communist stuff, the Alger Hiss stuff, the pumpkin papers, is you even if you didn't know the real historical Nixon, this is such a searing portrait of who Nixon was.
Well, it works even if you don't know Nixon or know anything about Nixon too. I mean, in 500 years, I would doubt that Nixon isn't great in everyone's memories, but you'd get a portrait of a very fucked up little man with some intelligence in the background.